Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global community, and we might just find a real soldier's story from your location too. The winter of 1945 was the coldest many soldiers had ever seen. In a prisoner of war camp deep in Germany, Corporal Jean LeBlanc from Louisiana was finishing his night watch. The wind was howling, sounding like the ghosts of the bayou back home. But suddenly, a different sound pierced the air. A melody. It was soft, fragile, and sung in a dialect that shouldn't exist 4,000 miles from home. A German prisoner, sitting in the shadows of a damp barrack, was humming a French Cajun lullaby. Jean froze. His heart raced as memories of his mother, rocking him to sleep on a porch in Louisiana, came rushing back. How could an enemy, a man wearing the uniform of the Reich, know the private song of his ancestors? Today, we tell a story of a connection so deep that even a world war couldn't break it. Jean LeBlanc wasn't just any soldier. He was a Cajun, a descendant of the French settlers who found refuge in the swamps of Louisiana. To Jean, the French language wasn't just words. It was the soul of his family. His speech was a rich tapestry, woven with words and rhythms that could trace their roots back to the old country, a heritage passed down through generations. When he was drafted, he left behind the warm humidity of the bayou, the familiar smell of cypress trees, and the comforting taste of his mother's gumbo for the frozen hell of Europe. For months, he had been trained, conditioned, and ordered to see the Germans as monsters, as shadows without faces, as nothing more than the enemy. The daily reality of war had reinforced this. He'd seen the brutality, the loss, and the destruction firsthand. But that night, as the faint, haunting melody drifted through the bitter cold, it began to unravel everything he thought he knew. That simple lullaby humanized the enemy. It was a sound of home, a sound of childhood, a sound of peace. It didn't belong in this place of war and hatred. Jean's hand tightened on his rifle, but it trembled. He approached the wooden bars of the prisoner's barrack, his boots crunching softly on the frozen ground. He needed to know if he was losing his mind, or if a piece of his home had truly found him in this dark, godforsaken place. Taking a deep breath, Jean leaned closer to the bars, the cold steel chilling his face. He whispered in the old French of his grandmother, a dialect he rarely used with anyone outside his family. "Who taught you that song?" The singing stopped abruptly. From the shadows, a figure stirred. It was a boy. He couldn't have been older than 18. With eyes wide with a mix of terror and a flicker of hope. He looked up at Jean, expecting a blow, a curse, anything but the sound of a shared tongue. In a broken, archaic version of the very same dialect, he replied, "My mother. She said it was the song of the lost ones. She told me that across the ocean, we had brothers who still sang this tune." A lump formed in Jean's throat, thick and hard to swallow. This wasn't possible. He pushed forward, his voice barely a whisper. "What is your name?" The prisoner replied, "Stefan." Stefan then began to explain his story. His great-grandfather, he said, had left Louisiana in the late 1800s. He decided to return to France, the ancestral homeland, and from there, the family had eventually ended up in Germany after another war reshuffled the map of Europe. Through all the upheaval, the relocations, and the changing loyalties, they had kept the lullaby. It was a secret treasure, a fragile link to a past in a place they had never seen, a way to remember where they truly came from. But the story goes deeper. As Jean listened, still trying to process the impossible coincidence, Stefan reached into the lining of his tattered, filthy coat. With fumbling, frozen fingers, he pulled out a small, yellowed piece of paper, folded carefully to protect it. It was a photograph, cracked and faded with age and travel. He handed it to Jean through the bars. The photograph showed a young man and a woman standing proudly in front of a moss-covered shack, the kind you'd only find deep in the Louisiana bayou. Jean's eyes filled with tears, blurring the image. He knew that shack. He had lived in it as a boy. The familiar porch, the crooked window, the towering cypress in the background. The people in the photo were his own great-grandparents. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Stefan wasn't just some stranger who happened to know a family song. He wasn't just a distant relative from a forgotten branch of the family tree. He was Jean's cousin. Fate, in its infinite and cruel wisdom, had played a twisted joke. It had taken two men of the same blood, separated by an ocean and generations, and placed them on opposite sides of the greatest conflict in human history. One was a guard, holding a rifle. The other, a prisoner, holding a memory. But beneath the tattered German uniform and the worn American one, they were bound by the same DNA and the same haunting melody. From that night on, everything changed for Jean. The line between friend and enemy, guard and prisoner, blurred into meaninglessness. For the rest of the war, Jean risked everything, his rank, his freedom, his very life, to keep Stefan alive. He began sharing his rations, smuggling the boy extra bread, a piece of chocolate, or a pair of warm socks he'd bartered for. In the dead of night, they would meet at the bars of the barrack, whispering in the shared French of their ancestors. They talked about the bayou, the smell of gumbo simmering on the stove, the deafening chorus of crickets on a hot summer night. For Stefan, these stories were a fantasy, a dream of a home he'd never known. For Jean, they were a lifeline, a reminder of the world he was fighting to return to. When the war finally ended, the chaos of liberation and repatriation began. Jean knew that Stefan, as a German soldier, could easily be sent to a Soviet camp, a fate many considered worse than death. Using every ounce of his influence, every connection he could make, Jean fought to ensure Stefan was processed as a displaced person of French descent. It was a long, bureaucratic battle, but Jean refused to give up. Finally, in 1948, a knock came on a wooden door in a small Louisiana parish. An old woman opened it to see her son, Jean, standing on the porch, thinner and older, but alive. And beside him stood a young man with familiar eyes. The family that war had tried to destroy was finally whole again. They sat on that porch that night, and for the first time in years, the lullaby was sung not as a lonely solo, but in harmony by two men who had once been enemies and were now and forever brothers. Jean and Stefan's story reminds us that beneath the uniforms, the flags, and the politics, we are all connected by stories, songs, and blood. Kindness is a language that no war can ever truly silence. Are you watching from Louisiana? Do you have a family story that sounds like a miracle? Share it with us in the comments. Your stories are the reason we keep this channel alive. Don't forget to subscribe to WW2 Tales. Until next time, remember, the heart knows no borders.